Okay, so I think we should start. It's already 6:30 here in India, IST time. Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon to all our participants. Welcome to the 28th webinar organized by Sri Lanka Evaluation Association. We are very pleased that you are here this evening with us. And as you know, the topic for today is remote evaluation in the context of fragility and prolonged crisis. And one or the other way, when we are working in this field of evidence, we have come across various challenges, doubts, but we also have learned a lot about evaluation in the context of crisis, right? So today's session is going to be very interesting, and I just want to mention something very, something here over here at this point of time as we start this webinar. According to the paper presented by European Commission in 2019, around 2 billion people live in countries affected by fragility, conflict, and high level of violence. And around half of the world's poor live in fragile and conflict affected states. And we can only imagine, how the number has drastically gone up after this COVID-19 crisis. And in spite of all these difficulties and challenges, did our evaluative effort came to an halt? Definitely not, right? We didn't stop there. We as an evaluator, we didn't stop there. So this crisis changed a lot the way we work. It changed the way we prioritized our evaluation, managed our evaluation, and conducted our evaluation, right? And this fragility and the prolonged crisis pushed the evaluators to think out of the box, to rethink about how to go about our evaluative work, how to address ethical concern, how to address the conceptual and methodological challenges. So that affects our capacity to conduct evaluation in such context, right? So once again, I welcome you all for this very interesting webinar. And so I am Rajani Kayastha, and I will be moderating this session. And Tashi, can we just move ahead with the slide? Yeah, so just to let you know that I've been working in the field of monitoring and evaluation for more than a decade in various organizations like UNICEF Rosa, UNDP, World Vision, Save the Children, and currently I am the team member of NEPS, National Evaluation Policy and Strategies, under Asia Pacific Evaluation Association. And so as we start, now I would like to call upon Mr. Tashi Dendup, and he's a young evaluator and emerging evaluator from Bhutan. He's APEA board member. He's a co-leader of EvalYouth Bhutan, and he works as a program officer at SAARC Development Fund Secretariat. And the floor is yours, Tashi, for the opening remarks.
Thank you so much for this introduction, Rajani. Looking at the cohorts of across the world, it's only fair enough to greet everyone by saying good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I, on behalf of Asia Pacific Evaluation, would like to welcome everyone to the 28th webinar series of our fellow MNE network, Sri Lanka Evaluation Association. At APEA and among MNE networks across the Asia Pacific, we always have a high regard for SLEvA, for their ingenuity, passion, and hard work in promoting and institutionalizing MNE as a strategic management tool across all sectors, which is also the primary goal of the APEA. Once again, I would like to congratulate SLEvA. The number 28 speaks for itself, the testimony for your ingenuity, passion, and hard work, as I said earlier. As we struggle, adapt, and lead to the realities of the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, in other words, the VUCA world, what would be more appropriate than this webinar titled Promoting Evaluation in Context of Fragility and Prolonged Crisis? Among the participants here today, I see lots of good number of M&E fraternity, policymakers, and program and project implementers. And I assure you that we will have lots to learn and take away from this webinar delivered by our highly distinguished speaker, Mr. Hur Hassnain, who has demonstrated experiences in monitoring and evaluation across a wide range of sectors, and moderated by equally competent and experienced M&E specialist, Ms. Rajani. With this, I would like to thank SLEvA and APEA for giving me this wonderful opportunity to share a few words to formally open the webinar. So thank you so much. Over to you, Rajani.
Thank you so much, Tashi. And now we'd like to go to the main section. But before that, I just want to remind you the few housekeeping rules that all of us are very well aware of, that we will still keep our mic and video off. But then we would really encourage you to, put up your questions, your observation, your comments on the chat box. We will be continuously monitoring that as the presentation go by. And if you have any questions to SLEvA, we will be sharing the contact address of theirs to you at the end of the session. So now let's get started. So before we start, I want to introduce you to a very distinguished person in the field of monitoring and evaluation. So to give us the global perspective on the given topic and also share the challenges and the lesson learned, we have this evening Mr. Hur Hassnain as a speaker. We are very pleased and glad to have you here. He is an independent evaluator, the founder of Pakistan Evaluation Association, and board member at the International Evaluation Academy and the International Development Evaluation Association. Currently, he works as the senior evaluation advisor for the European Commission, and also he's based out of Brussels right now. And very interesting fact about him that he is the co-author of the book Evaluation in the Fragility, Conflict and Violence. We are very pleased to have you here, Hur. And so before we start his presentation, may I launch a poll, Hur? Is that okay? We have a small poll planned for you all. Okay, so here's the poll that I would like to launch. So here's the question. Before we start, we just want to have your opinion on this. When you think about remote evaluation, what makes you apprehensive? What is that thing that makes you nervous? When we think about remote evaluation, and we would like to know your opinion. We're getting the response. I'll share shortly. We see that more than 50% of the participants have already responded. The responses are coming in, and now I'll just end the poll. Majority of you have already responded. So here's the result that I want to share. A majority of you have said that heavy reliance on the technology actually makes us very apprehensive about remote evaluation, and most of you also said that data quality assurance is another concern that they have, and then 24% of you all said that delivering the evidence on time for action is something that is always the back of our mind. It's always a concern. And some of you also have raised that keeping up the ethical standard and safeguarding, that is something that that is also a concern when we talk about the remote evaluation. So thank you so much I am going to stop sharing this this poll, the response, and the floor is yours, Hur. It is.
Fantastic. Okay, great. Okay, hi everybody. First of all, apologies for the little glitch there, but then I think we are now all set and in very good hands of Tashi. So my name is Hur Hassnain, and I have been engaged in the business of evaluation for over a decade now, like about 17, 18 years. And it has been a very interesting journey, of course, you know, in different parts of the world, Asia, Africa, Europe, and some experience in Latin America as well. So next slide, please. I don't think I can control the slide, right? I mean, it has to be you, Tashi. Okay, so I've been engaged with some voluntary associations. And the Pakistan Evaluation Association is something we founded in 2017. So since then, we have been working a lot in promoting evaluation and evaluation business in Pakistan, Sri Lanka. Just like in cricket, in evaluation also has been our good friend. So we have been talking to many of Sri Lankan evaluators who helped us a lot as well in the gigs that we did. And then there is this International Development Evaluation Association, IDEAS, which is a rather global development evaluation association rather than a country or region focus. I'm currently the board member and there representing the Asia Pacific region. So next slide, please. So at IDEAS, we have been doing a lot of work, amongst which one is that we created a thematic interest group on evaluation in fragility, conflict, and violence. And this thematic interest group, we call it TIG. So this TIG is consisting of people from all around the world, from different kind of institutions, from the public sector, private sector, NGOs, academia, and etc. And you are more than welcome to come and join us, because today's webinar topic is about the same topic. So you can come and discuss, and you can talk to the senior evaluators or like evaluation of similar experience as you, and ask them what they did in similar situations. And also with the help of IDEAS, we published this book last year. And again, the idea came from the thematic interest group. And then we continue to meet at different occasions. And then we published this book. So this is available free at IDEA's website. So you can go there and go into publications and download it. But then if you want a printed copy, it's a very beautifully designed book with this cover page donated to us by a very famous Japanese painter. So you can always go to Amazon, go to your nearest Amazon market. I don't know if Sri Lanka has an Amazon market, but then it's available there. So you can order from there a printed copy, which is really beautiful. Next slide, please. Okay, so for today, the key themes would be around understanding the uncertainties, understanding the contextual realities of a rather fluid, rapidly changing, and sometimes volatile context. Because it is the context comes first before anything, whether it's an evaluation, programming, research, or anything else. So let's have a quick conversation on this, and then we'll talk about some of the challenges of remotely done evaluations, some of the tools and techniques of remote data collection, and some of the key things. I saw that quite a few, I mean, although it was the poll, the ethics, was some of them selected the ethics that you are really concerned. about the ethics of how things would be or could be done in remotely done evaluations, and then I've summarized some key takeaways for you to take with you. Next slide. All right, so this would need multiple clicks, Tashi. So this is a very interesting framework that is drafted by somebody called David Snowden, who worked for IBM. It's called a Cinefin framework. And I mean, Tashi, if you could just click multiple clicks, you will have the text there. So it's divided. Dave Snowden divided the context into 4 different parts, and one being the known context, where the causality and the relationship between causes and effects are very clear. For example, somebody has a headache, and in 95% of the cases, what you do is you propose them a paracetamol, and that somehow, in most cases, relieve the pain. And then there is this knowable context, which is like, for example, you have the architectural blueprint of constructing a building, and so you have some guidelines available, and then you draft something on it. And then there are these complex environments in which the relationship between the causes and effects are not very clear. So that is where you try to find out as much evidence as possible to implement something. And then there are these chaotic kind of situations where there are no relationships established between causes and effects. And what you do is you continue doing things that you think work, and then you stop doing things that you think are not working. So it's like really like trying and testing different things. Next slide, please. So we discussed this thing. So this is very much how the the results chain look like in a uncertain environment. So it's not very linear. So you do one activity and the result could just happen anywhere. Like a lot of unintended intended results and a lot of unintended results, which could be positive or negative. So you have to be very careful of like how change is happening in such kind of situations. And let's move forward to the next slide. Okay, so we have just like looked a bit on like what are the different scenarios that we are talking about today. But then to be very specific, when we talk about doing evaluation in a fragile and conflict-affected context, which Rajani has very beautifully explained in the beginning, giving references to papers from the European Commission, from the World Bank. I mean, the numbers are really high, but then these are the numbers which were calculated before the pandemic. So pandemic has had a severe impact on the economies, as we all know, all around the world, but then more specifically to the already fragile context. So what are the challenges? I mean, number one is, of course, if you're talking about remote evaluations, if you're talking about contexts that are like extremely fragile, that are war-torn, that are conflict-affected, then in most of the cases, you do not have access to the participant. You cannot just go to a place, do a survey, like talk to people, and etc. So there are these kind of limitations. There are ways of getting the information through the local enumerators, but that involve a lot of training so that the local enumerators understand the reason why the data is being collected, the community understand why the data is being collected, and this kind of trust is established. There is also in such scenarios a risk of violence because the biases of people are always there. So people, if they're local, they are perceived in a certain way by the society, they're understood, and people assume that they have certain kind of biases. So there are some examples of evaluation in such context where things have gone wrong. So sorry, FGD stands for focus group discussion. This is one of the evaluation method in which you gather between 8 to 12 people and then throw a scenario, a question, or a situation and ask them to discuss this. One thing is also this, lack of informal meetings, because when you personally go to conduct an evaluation in a remote area, you do a lot of informal meetings. For example, the driver who's driving you to the sites, you have the conversations there. You sit down for a coffee somewhere, and then you have like informal conversation that really builds up your contextual understanding. But then the remote evaluation in this way, it doesn't provide that opportunity. But then one of the practices that I have been doing, and I'm sure a lot of other people were doing, was like, if it is a remote exercise, then try to come online a little before, or like stay in the meeting a little bit longer, so people have the opportunity to talk informally as well. Access to technology is an important point, especially for the most vulnerable people. So if you are designing an evaluation remotely and that heavily relies on technology, then there is this fear that the most marginalized people may miss out on it. People who don't have access to, for example, mobile phone, internet, computer, etc. And this is unfortunately, like, majority of the cases, especially in the Asia Pacific region, women have less access to technology compared to the men. Or like you can say the elderly people who have like less understanding of these things and less access to it. Also, another thing is about defining how change happens in such kind of context. The previous slide I showed you, result can happen anywhere. So you have very limited theoretical foundations of how things go. For example, think about the current COVID-19 pandemic. Every country was trialing a different way of either getting rid of COVID-19 or like trying to protect their citizens through different approaches. So basically, you don't have an evidence base of what actually to do in such kind of situations. And then also this fluidity. Again, I'll give the example of this very recent and still ongoing COVID-19 crisis. You plan something, but then all of a sudden this breakout of the virus comes in and all your plans go in vain. And then similarly, the context is changing. Like in resettlement context, like for example, think of Afghanistan situation. So one day the community is in one place and all of a sudden the context change and the community moves, the whole village move from there. Or think of the humanitarian situation where people are living in refugee camps and all of things change and things move. So this fluidity is also important. For example, I remember like many evaluations. One I did in South Sudan, where we did a baseline survey, conducted, gathered information, like the starting point. And then in evaluations, you compare different time intervals, a baseline versus midterm. And then after a few months, the community just moved, the whole context changed. There were new people there. Similarly, this is the case in slum dwelling communities. This also happened in Afghanistan several times in our evaluations. And also standard criteria, what criteria to use, what standards to use. Trust is also an issue. Either it is a completely outsider or you're hiring local enumerators to gather data for you. That how would you establish that environment of trust that you can talk to each other about sensitive matters? And also, how do you adapt in this changing context is a big question. And when the situations are really fragile and things are moving constantly, the culture of learning becomes, I mean, it doesn't become less important, but then it's less priority in practice, because what you are doing is really delivering aid, like delivering to the most needy people, so that the capturing the learning side of the thing then misses out, which is also a big challenge in these kind of evaluation, that you cannot rely on solid data banks. Next slide, please.
Hur, so since we are here, can we just pause a bit and then take a short poll?
Sure, yes.
So here we have a question. I'm launching this. So now we'll be talking about, data collection tools and methods, and it's something that we would like to also know from your side. Which of these given techniques over here do you think are not effective for any evaluative effort in the context of fragility and prolonged crisis? There are various number of techniques given here, but among them, which one do you think is less effective? Okay, so we're getting in the response. Okay, so here we have the response. So I'm going to just end the poll right now and share the result. And so majority of you have said that administrating survey by non-specialized local enumerators can be, ineffective way of doing the data collection, or the, that could be not a great idea. And some of you are also saying that, location tracking may not be so much effective, or communication through online platform may not be so much effective, right? So this is the response that we've received from you. And there's very few people who've mentioned that use of phone and tablet for data survey may not be so much effective. So we just want to just have this quick poll. Thank you for sharing this, and I'm going to stop sharing the result here, and let's continue with the presentation.
Okay, so next click as well. I see that quarter of you have talked about location. Yeah, thank you, Tashi. Almost quarter of you have said about this location tracking, and that's very interesting. I remember once we were doing a survey in south of Pakistan, in a very rural community. So in Pakistan, in most of the cases, when we are gathering data from people, you have to take the permission of authorities. So we were planning to get data from mobile phone, and we contacted the authorities, but we were not given permission to use mobile phone with GPS. So that's interesting. I mean, I would love to hear more, whoever have responded in the chat box, what your experiences have been. And I guess like majority, I mean, either it is from Sri Lanka or other parts of the world, then feel free to write down what your experiences have been, because it's not only about me sharing information. You can also share your, hello?
Yes, Hur, we can hear you. And just
hello?
yeah, we can
you
hear
hear me
you.
now?
Yes,
Okay,
yes, we can
fantastic.
hear you. And just to let you know that you just have 8 more minutes to go.
Okay, let's move fast. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, so these are some of the different approaches. So we might run out of time, and I actually totally understood that, because we had this only 25 minutes maximum 30 minutes to speak. So what I have done is I have put hyperlinks to these things. Rajani, maybe you, Tashi, or anybody else in the team, if you are, I think you're in touch with most of the participants, so please be free to make a PDF of the presentation and share it with them, because you can always click on these links, so that will take you to the to more information. But I mean, the key things I wanted to share, there are like quite a lot of different views, different ways you can gather data. Phone and SMS based surveys need a lot of training, because and it also means that you need to gather the phone numbers of the people in advance. There are a lot of online smartphone surveys, but then also it means that it requires smartphones, and it requires a bit of understanding of how to use them. Online interviews and FGDs also happened quite a lot in this COVID-19 situation. There have been, like, Zoom and WebEx and Microsoft Teams, which we use, but again, this doesn't replicate the real in-person FGDs and interviews. There are also different methods of the story gathering using different tools, preparing participatory videos where communities go and make a video talking about the change stories and etc. Next slide, please. And then also social media. Social media is a very important way of looking at different things, community perceptions, and etc. And then you can analyze differently. But then there is, you have to be careful on, like, it's only the people who have access to the media. WhatsApp has also been used a lot. People formed WhatsApp groups to discuss, like, gather feedback, like, feedback mechanisms and etc. So that are some of the ways people have been using. And next one, yes, I mean, there is this photo diaries, journal logs, and participatory videos. They have been very effective as well. Photo diaries, you ask communities to gather photos of how things are changing. It's very useful in construction related interventions. For example, if you're building irrigation channel, a school, or a bridge somewhere, or a road, so you can continue having those photo diaries, or diary or journal logs are important, are interesting in terms of, like, behavioral change interventions, where you are noting down, kind of maintaining a diary or a journal. And these participatory videos have been very active in terms of, like, gathering data, where people have been sitting down together, discussing, I mean, again, FGDs, focus group discussions, and then taking the most significant change that people think in majority, and making a video of it. Next slide, please. And geospatial technology, of course, have been used quite a lot in different evaluations. And I mean, in Yemen situation, this has been used to see the migration trends, how people have been moving because of conflict from one place to another. This is one of the evaluation on top that we did in Sierra Leone. It was for one of the UN project on electrifying Sierra Leone. I mean, that's a country, it's a very old statistic, but then only 3% of the country had access to electricity. So this, with the help of the UK funding, one of the UN agencies started, electrifying the country. So you can see that the nighttime light data from 2012 and 2019, it's a comparison between two. So you can see in 2019, it's much more lit. And if you go to, and you see these on the left side, I have left hyperlinks. So people who are interested in online courses, you can and be free to. I hope Rajani, you or other colleagues could send a PDF of this to the participants so they can click
Definitely.
and read
Yes,
more.
definitely.
Okay, next slide, Tashi. And this is a picture which I've taken from the book, the FCV book that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. So what it does is it again look at the nighttime light data of Syria and compare the 2012 result with 2015 results. As you can see, contrary to the Sierra Leone case, here the nighttime light has gone drastically down. So you see in 2012, more light was there after 3 years because of the war. So you can see, and this also, the two examples very much explain that, yes, you can get the data, but then how do you interpret that data would remain very much with you as an evaluator. So yes, I mean, the scene I make from here is that, yes, light has reduced, but what has caused this reduction is a question mark. So you need to add a bit of mixed methods, try to get the interpretation from here. One word of caution is ICTs do bring a lot of possibilities and etc., but then they also bring a lot of new risks. So you have to be very careful in terms of applying them. So one of the ways is to do proper risk assessment before, invest time in a trusting environment, talk to people, tell them why you are gathering data, what you will do of the data, how you will get back to them with your report and etc. Next slide. Be inclusive, of course. Make sure that you're not missing out on the most vulnerable voices. For example, if you're using the smartphones, think of how many people will have access to that. So basically, you're not only collecting data of people who use smartphones, not the people who don't have a smartphone or who don't have access to such phones, or who are not literate enough to respond to your surveys. Inequalities, so making sure you understand the different inequalities and the power relationship within a community, and understand the family dynamics, community. For example, if you're interviewing a daughter-in-law in front of the mother-in-law, does that create some kind of pressure on your respondents and etc. Next slide. So one of the ways, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of evaluation use different kind of feedback mechanism. There are a lot of different softwares available. One of them is the Frontline SMS. They have free options as well. A lot of people use WhatsApp, simply some WhatsApp groups to keep a tab on what is actually going on while you're doing evaluations. If somebody has anything, they could discuss among themselves and let others know. Next slide. I'm a bit aware of time, so I'm just trying to wrap it up. Another thing is, I have been saying this for a long time, that people have the right to know what their own data says. So what we do in evaluation, we gather a lot of data from people and then we never go back to them. I mean, in best cases, what happens, especially I'm talking about the internationally led evaluations, in best cases, what we do is we gather people in the capital city and we invite the big ministers and etc., who most of the time don't understand what these people, very marginalized people, are saying. So try to close that loop as well, because more specifically, if you're doing evaluation remotely, then you need to make sense of the data. Imagine the photos I showed you from nighttime light data. I mean, yes, you can make sense of it, but then that is you making sense of it. Try to discuss this with the community themselves and see if they agree with how you are making sense of it. Either you agree, either you don't agree, and if you don't agree, in your report you have two different views. You can say like, okay, one is this and community think it is this. So it's more interesting when you present different ways of looking at things. Next slide, please. Hello. Yeah, this is one of the recent dissemination study that was done at the one of the European Commission INPA's external help desk service about the most popular dissemination products. In this study, we reached out to different evaluation offices and we looked at how people are producing different knowledge products, different dissemination knowledge products. So videos have come as the first one. So videos is actually a good tool because especially if, because videos, a lot of people can understand better because you are listening, you are viewing things, and it's a video, so it's easier to grasp what has been changed. So if you want to get back to people, for them to understand what is changing. Oh, thank you, Rajani. But I'm almost at the end of my presentation anyways. So yeah, videos have been very effective. So if you are an evaluator, you can do this as part of the evaluation while you're gathering data, but of course with consents, etc. And then if you are an evaluation commissioner, then you can make sure that you write about it in your TOR so that you're not just producing one report that may just sit in somebody's inbox, or if somebody prints it, it's just like a document in their shelf, but it will be an evaluation that is disseminated. People know about it, people talk about it, and if the evidence is useful, people use that to construct new programs or amend the ongoing program. So the next slide, please. Okay, and you can do multiple click until you go to the last one. And so, yeah, I mean, I just prepared this slide. So just like few points, safety and security is extremely important in such kind of evaluations or programs, because no accountability or learning activity should supersede the safety and security of the people you are gathering data from, or the safety and security of people who are gathering data for you, or even the partners that you work with in these really conflict affected areas or far-flung areas. They are the one who will be discussing or like will be there. I mean, if you're using the different mobile tools, think about how the data is being stored. For example, Kobo Toolbox is one of the software that's being used for gathering data. Look at where they're storing their data. I think it's in the cloud, mainly led by the US. There are other softwares that you are using. So think about where they are storing the data, who has access to it. Think about the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, whether people are following it in terms of storing that data or not. Look at the national data protection policies and the regulations as well. And then making sure in sensitive environments, making sure that your evaluation throughout is conflict sensitive, is gender sensitive, is contextually viable and sensitive. Confidentiality and anonymity is again very important things. If you're gathering people's data, that could be very sensitive. So making sure that that doesn't go in wrong hands. Acceptance building is very important if you are not physically present. So making sure people understand why the data is being collected, because I think majority of us are M&E people today, but then for people who are not in the business would wonder, like, why are these people roaming around with tablets, mobile technology? What are they doing with our data? So it's very important to explain. And then as I discussed earlier, mixed method is important because so you gather information from one method and then you can triangulate it with the information that you gather from different methods. So you can try, to try to make sense of it as much as you can. And I think in today's world, that is like the very important job of an evaluator. Just gathering data and doing a simple analysis of it, I think we have moved beyond it. So, I mean, it's about like, how do you make sense of it through different channels, through different methods, and then also with the community validation with them, and then making sure they agree with your points as well. And then the enumerators and stakeholders, their job doesn't finish with evaluation. So making sure that, you keep that loop open. And then also you are not alone. There are like many other agencies, the universities, a lot of researchers are out there, a lot of think tanks are there. So they're also gathering data. They also have information. Most of the cases, the government offices, the statistical offices have data. So you can always, try to get that data and see if you have that information already available, because then you'll be saving your time and people's time, and then avoid unnecessary risks. And when we talk about ICTs, always keep a backup plan. And I'm saying that with experience. And I think with this, my presentation ends. And I'm sorry, I think we only have 10-15 minutes left for the questions and answers. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much, Hur, and thank you everyone for listening so carefully. And we see some questions here. Now we'll just spend 10 minutes for Q&A. And then with your permission, we would like to extend the webinar by another 10 minutes. And I'd like to club few questions over here, Hur. Basically, the first question to start with, in typically in traditional kind of evaluation that we work in, the community and the affected populations are involved in the process of the evaluation, right? And we also go back to the community to share the findings, to share the lesson learned. But how can we ensure participation, communities participation and their engagement in the process of remote evaluation? And also, as somebody puts the question here, how often do we as an evaluator share our findings with the community back, especially when it's about remote evaluation?
Okay, so those are very interesting questions, Rajani. Thank you very much. So your last point of how often we do it, I don't think we do it very often. And I think it's a big gap. As I said in the presentation earlier, that it is the right of the people whose data we are gathering to know what we make out of their data. So, I mean, we are all on the same boat on it. So I don't have an accurate answer to it, but then we should, as evaluator or evaluation commissioner, try to incorporate this within our evaluation methodology. If you're commissioners, we should think of adding this in the DORs so that we do this. To me, literally, if it's community-based data, then the evaluation should not be accepted without a proper validation exercise. But then there is a long journey. And then specifically when we talk about remotely done evaluation, then it's even more complicated. And then if you're talking about remotely done evaluation in a fragile environment, in an already conflict affected environment, then it is even more difficult, because it is a big risk to gather people where there is some war going on, so like they could easily be targeted, and then your evaluation should not be responsible for such kind of activities. I think very quickly thinking about some of the things is like, in my slide I mentioned about those feedback mechanisms, looking at like some of the trusted individuals, looking at people who are trusted by the community themselves. So trying to finding them out, and this participation engagement angle that we discuss, see how we could engage people through a different trusted people who could then feedback to you. I think there is no clear-cut answer in how do you do that, but I think it's a mixture of different things, using different techniques, a mix of different methods, so that you can gather that information, triangulate, analyze, and present in your report.
Mhm. And we also have one question over here. Sonam is very curious to know actually whether we can do remote evaluation in places where there is no access to internet or telephone. Has there been any example or anything that you are aware of, or is that even possible?
I mean, definitely it's possible, but again, and I mean, there are a lot of such kind of areas where you don't have access to internet. And when we talk about Asia Pacific region, like the regions we come from, there are like a lot of communities that are in extremely rural areas where there are no access to internet and etc. And then there was also a case example that I gave earlier in one of the evaluation in Pakistan, where we didn't get permission to use mobile phone. And this goes with one of the questions in the chat about the backup on ICTs. So I'll just answer both of the questions through an example of this Pakistan case that I mentioned earlier. So we were using this software called Sprockler, which is a story-based data collection method in which you start with a story of somebody and all the questions are about that person's story. And then you later on analyze it based on different criteria. So what did we do? We gathered the data because we could not take mobile phones. We printed out the questions like in a very traditional way. I see most of you guys are much younger than me, so I don't know if you know that back in the days it existed. When I started M&E, and I did my first surveys, I used to carry like piles of papers of multiple pages of questionnaires in it and sit with people and like fill them by hand. But I think for a lot of I haven't seen this. I mean, I think it's pretty much outdated now. So a lot of people use tablet and mobile phone these days. So yeah, I mean, go back to the traditional ways, print papers, go with the papers, sit with them and take notes. If you're doing FGDs, making sure that there is a note taker who's sitting there whose job is specifically just to take note while one person is doing facilitation. You can add one person who is an observer, who can just be an observer. So, a mix of three people could then do that. But I mean, if you don't have access to it completely, then one of the options would be to train the people who are gathering data for you as much as you can. And that training can be, out of that area, phone, could be online. So it really depends on the context you are dealing with. But then you can use these kind of different techniques on preparing them. And I mean, this has actually been one of the challenges in remotely done evaluations, that like people who are gathering data are from the same society. So a lot of time you don't even find people from the same community, especially in the cases of like if you're trying to find like, I mean, it happened to me in one of the evaluation in South Sudan, where we really wanted to find a few women enumerators from the same community, because in South Sudan it's a bit of a conflict affected context. So it's risky to send somebody from one community to another community because there are like some ethnic rivalries. So we couldn't find enough like female enumerators to gather data. And of course, like there are multiple languages, the same like people who speak the same language. So you may face these kind of challenges, but then you may need to try to find out different ways of how you could actually overcome these challenges. And I mean, one way is to making sure that you invest a lot of time in planning before you execute something. You try to put double the time of planning in evaluation in such context than you would do in a normal context.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Hur. I'd like to take one last question. And basically, it's about the qualitative research or the evaluative piece. If we are focused on qualitative, research, let's say, traditionally, typically in a normal situation, we would collect data from, face-to-face in-depth interview or do focus group discussion, do a lot of field work, right? But then in the context of fragility, and especially in this COVID-19 context, crisis, and even in the case of various other crises, if we want to do qualitative evaluative piece, let's say, how can we, rely on technology and other innovative techniques? Are there any very interesting technique that we can use so that we can get same level of richness in the information? And if you are aware of the challenges or the lesson learned regarding qualitative research in this context, I mean, we'd be very happy to hear your experience, Hur.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'll be repeating myself. First of all, the most important question would be the safety and security of everybody. So if you are thinking of doing qualitative research, evaluation methods and tools, and you're trying to gather people at one place, or like sending people to gather data for you, really we need to think about the safety and security of people who are gathering data and whose data we are capturing. And I mean, the things from my own experience have been the mixed methods. And I've been working in these very complicated, complex, chaotic environments for a long time. So for example, some of the things that I shared earlier, try to, first you need to understand the context. And if you think it's really feasible and viable to do the evaluation, understand like whether there is technology available and whether you're taking a route of technology. There you can mix and match different methods. So I talked about this photo voice message. I mean, if people have mobile phone, they can take photos. You can engage, this community-based monitoring and evaluation activity. And I mean, one of the very good option is this embedding evaluation within the program as it is going. And for that, if you're working in an organization and you have access to program designers, you can then influence them because in my past experience, I have a lot of examples of where we, pressurized the designers to add evaluation as the project is going. For example, we used outcome harvesting, which is an evaluation approach, but then we used it at different intervals as an ongoing evaluation through the life of an intervention. So you continue to get this data as you're implementing the program. So when you are doing a full-fledged evaluation, you have this time series analysis of different kind of data that you have gathered over a particular interval of time. So that's an interesting one. Some of these technological things that I very quickly showed you this remote sensing, geospatial analysis, this participatory videos where communities themselves. I mean, we didn't have much time, but then these are the evaluations which I have done. So I could have given you more examples, but very briefly, you can add different things like this video, which comes out of a focus group discussion. You can identify the most significant change by gathering people. And then if you know that there is one particular thing that has actually caused the change, or if there are 2, 3, you can then try to organize debates on it, make video of it, take photos of it. And then these different sources of information could be then put together to make sense of like what has really caused change. I mean, whether it is qualitative or quantitative data collection method, the objective is to find a solid evidence, basically. So I would, again, repeat that we should not just rely on qualitative way of gathering data, but we should rather think of how we could mix and match different things. Like, okay, this is a qualitative one. Let us also complement it with a quantitative one. So what you can do is you can do a quick quantitative survey followed by different interviews, different focus group discussion, and then you can see if the quantitative side of the data matches with the qualitative side of the things. And you can do it repeatedly as well. You can do a series of focus group discussion before you develop your quantitative survey. And then that FGDs and interviews will help you define your survey questionnaire. And then after you have got that data, you go back to the community and say, okay, now this is the data. What do you think of it? And that is where the focus group discussions would be very helpful. And this you can do, preferably in person. If not in person, then see how you could do it online. If online is not possible, then try to identify different trusted people from the same community who could do the discussion on your behalf and come back to you. But then again, this all involves a lot of training, a lot of time, and much more resources than a normal situation. So you need to factor all these things in your evaluation. And that makes the planning phase of your evaluation much larger than the other phases. So if you have invested a lot in the planning, and one thing about the planning is like my exercise that I have done with people were just to imagine with people different scenarios that could happen. So scenario 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and from the community members, from the people who are from that context, thinking about, okay, what could be the alternative ways, alternative scenarios that could happen as the result of this. And then thinking those in advance would help you deal with those kind of situations. Does that answer your question well?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. This discussion was very enriching. And I definitely, can speak on behalf of the participants also that we have really, benefited a lot from your experience and your knowledge. Thank you so much. We are very pleased to have you here in this session. And now, just to give the closing remarks, I would like to call upon Vennila Thevarajah. She works in World Vision Sri Lanka as a meal specialist, and she's also a SLEvA member and YE member, and she is research monitoring evaluation professional and statistician by education. Vennila, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rajani. Hello, everyone. I'm Vennila Thevarajah, member of Sri Lanka Evaluation Association and a volunteer at EvalYouth Networks. We have reached the end of the 28th SLEvA webinar titled Remote Evaluation in Context of Fragility and Prolonged Crisis. First and the foremost, we would like to express our appreciation to the speaker, Hur Hassnain, and the moderator, Rajani Kayastha, for their excellent presentation and valuable contribution to the topic. It was a pleasure to have you with us. Further, we would like to appreciate all the participants who have allocated their time and participated in this webinar. As we have already heard a complete brief explanation from her about how to do evaluation in conflict-driven countries. So we have learned about uncertainties in the context where an evaluation takes place, challenges of remote evaluations, remote data collection techniques, and the things that we have to be aware of such situations. With that note, we are truly satisfied with our participants' engagement in the Q&A session. We once again thank you all for being here with us for this evening, and hope that this activity has given you much clear understanding of remote evaluation in context of fragility and prolonged crisis. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Vennila. So I just want to quickly let you know that, the next webinar is happening on 27th of April, and it's going to be very interesting. The topic, as you see here, is 10 questions indigenous communities should ask evaluator. The speaker for this session is Fiona Cram, and Yoko Ishida will be moderating the session. So we'll see you there. Thank you so much, and thank you for the production. I really want to extend my thanks to the production team and Vennila and Tashi for your time and for your input. And most of all, Hur, we really extend our, we really are very thankful that you are here, and we've really benefited from your experience, as I said earlier. Thank you so much for giving your time and over here. Thank you so much.